Vladimir Putin is subject to relentless media scrutiny, most recently in the form of a CNN special called The Most Powerful Man in the World. Here's RT's Emily Sue on what this insightful documentary actually revealed.
Ladies and gentlemen, CNN proudly counts down to its latest blockbuster.
He answers to no one.
To lead is to control.
What Vladimir Putin is, he's a thug, he's a KGB agent, and he's a killer.
Join Fareed Zakaria for The Most Powerful Man in the World.
And finally, the day has arrived. Wow, that soundtrack just draws you in, doesn't it? Let's put aside the music for a sec. What do we actually learn from this much-anticipated special news report? For starters, we now know exactly what kind of phone Putin used to call Moscow when he was stuck inside the KGB headquarters in Dresden back in 1989.
Desperate for help, Putin dialed KGB headquarters in Moscow, over and over again.
Hello? Officer Putin? Hello? What? I can't hear you. Well, nobody uses that kind of phone anymore. It's 1989, not 1935. Well, find a new phone and call back, okay? All right. Okay, bye. Another crucial detail we learned is the main opposition hideout in Moscow.
Literally a block away from his inauguration was a cafe called Jean-Jacques, where the opposition liked to gather and drink wine and drink coffee.
So here's how you become the fiercest opponents of Kremlin. A glass of wine in the one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. Life is good. Oh, and how can I forget? American politicians are apparently obsessed with Putin's soul.
I was able to get a sense of his soul.
Bush's take on Putin triggered a strong response from Hillary Clinton 7 years later. And that quote was used not once, but 3 times in this nearly hour-long special news report.
He was a KGB agent. By definition, he doesn't have a soul.
Dramatic music, unexpected plot twists, even supernatural elements. You name it, this Hollywood blockbusters got them all. Sorry, I mean special news report.
With the fire still raging, Putin went outside and faced the mob by himself.
This is the drama that stays with Putin all the time.
My point, exactly.
6 years to the day since the start of Syria's conflict, Damascus has been hit by 2 bomb attacks. In the first, at the main court complex, state media says a suicide bomber killed at least 25 people. A second attack followed in an area to the west of the Palace of Justice. On Saturday, scores of people, most of them Iraqi Shiite pilgrims, were killed in a double suicide attack in the Syrian capital, claimed by an alliance of jihadist groups.
When protests against the Syrian regime started in March 2011, no one could have predicted a war that would span the next 6 years.
This is the story of how a line of graffiti started a revolution. One evening, a teenage schoolboy was holding a can of black spray paint. He says some other boys talked him into tagging his school with the words, "Ijaka dor ya doktor," meaning, "It's your turn, doctor," referring to Bashar al-Assad. These words sparked the beginning of what would become the Syrian war. To understand how, it's important to remember this happened while the Arab Spring was erupting. Protests in Tunisia, Egypt, and Libya all led to the fall of their leaders, and Syria's Bashar al-Assad wasn't going to allow it. On March 6, about 15 boys from this school in Daraa were arrested and tortured by Assad's Ba'athist security forces. Their parents and community elders begged for their release, but were reportedly told, "Forget about your children. Go have new kids. If you can't, send us your wives, and we'll get them pregnant for you." Word spread, and on Tuesday, March 15th, peaceful protests in Damascus and Aleppo organized in what they called a day of rage. This was a turning point, and the government reacted violently. That Friday, thousands of locals in Daraa took to the streets to demand the boys' release, as well as call for democratic reform and an end to corruption. Security forces shot at them, killing 4 protesters. The next day, 10,000 protested at the funerals for those killed. Again, security forces fired into the crowd, killing 6 and injuring over 100. During the next week, several other protests, clashes, and killings took place, and 15 days after their arrests, Assad sent representatives to Daraa and released the teens. But the uprising had already been set in motion. By the end of March, over 100,000 people were rallying in Daraa. 45 days after a single act of graffiti, there were protests all over the country, calling for Assad to step down. Dozens were killed by Syrian security forces and many more injured. Then, on April 18th, in the city of Homs, hundreds of thousands marched to the city's Clock Tower Square for a sit-in protest. At dawn the following day, Assad's security forces stormed the square and opened fire on the unarmed crowd. What became known as the Clock Tower Massacre was a pivotal point in the uprising. Soon after, nearly half of Syria's 220,000 security forces defected. Military arms depots were open to civilians, and what had been a peaceful uprising became an armed resistance.
Since then, more than 400,000 people are estimated to have been killed. More than 1.9 million others have been wounded. More than 6 million people have fled the country, and 6.6 million others have been internally displaced. These last two figures account for about half of the country's pre-war population. Ceasefire attempts came and went, and the country slid towards what most people feared, civil war. Efforts to find a solution failed, and more groups began to join the conflict. In May, Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah confirmed what everyone had suspected. His fighters were inside Syria alongside regime forces. And in June, Daesh took control of Raqqa and made it its de facto capital. The group's expansion and attacks in the West eventually led to US intervention in Syria.
Last night, on my orders, America's armed forces began strikes against ISIL targets in Syria.
And it wasn't just the US. All of these countries became involved in airstrikes in Syria. But the most important of them was Russia. Vladimir Putin's intervention in Syria turned the tide of the war, something that became clear with the fall of eastern Aleppo, the last major urban stronghold of the opposition, in December 2016. The Assad regime now seems more secure than ever since the uprising began. On the opposition side, Turkey has been a major sponsor. The Turkish-led Operation Euphrates Shield allowed the Syrian opposition to push Daesh out of parts of northern Syria. But it's also brought them into confrontation with the YPG, a group that's backed by the United States, which now adds a further level of complexity to a conflict that continues to rage on.
Any foreign troops coming to Syria without our invitation or consultation or permission, they are invaders, whether they are American, Turkish, or any other one. They are very good in creating problems and destroying, but they are very bad in finding solutions.
Is what he's saying there true? Is the U.S. hindering the situation there at the moment, or what?
Really good question. Who knows? What we do know, however, is that America going into Syria, a sovereign country, without the invitation of the government, that is against international law, it's an act of war. Congress hasn't approved any strikes, so again, they're potentially against the Constitution there. I mean, very many questions. And then when you look at actually the broader geopolitical context of this situation, what are we actually trying to do? There are up to maybe 100 different nationalities of jihadi fighters inside Syria. We've got about 80,000 of them in there. Who are we choosing as, I've read in reports, local forces. Well, what does that mean? That means, rebel forces. That doesn't mean that we're working alongside people who are actually trying to get rid of terrorist activity. It means that we're heightening one side against the other. And what is the long-term goal of that? I would really like to know.
I think the temperature's rising diplomatically, militarily, all around the world. For example, 400 Marines are in Syria with heavy artillery. 2,500 paratroopers from the 82nd Airborne are in Kuwait. They're on a mission in Syria and Iraq. And now, Navy SEAL Team 6, along with F-35 fighter jets, will train with South Korean forces. They'll simulate a strike on North Korea. John Bolton joins us now. The temperature's rising. This is militarily speaking all around the world. Are we close to a flashpoint anywhere?
Well, I think the Trump administration inherited a badly deteriorating American security posture around the world, and what you're seeing is the manifestation of that deterioration in a number of different places. I think especially on the Korean Peninsula, for a variety of reasons, the aggression that North Korea has shown in its continued pursuit of deliverable nuclear weapons, the political crisis in South Korea, that you could find a flashpoint there, not because anybody necessarily intends it, but because of the uncertainty of the situation. So yes, I do think, and it was inevitable, that that the mistakes made by the Obama administration would begin to manifest themselves in ways that Trump would have to deal with.
President Donald Trump has given the Central Intelligence Agency secret new authority to conduct drone strikes against suspected terrorists. This is a change to the Obama administration's policy of limiting the spy agency's paramilitary role and reopening a turf war between the agency and the Pentagon. The new authority, which hadn't been previously disclosed, represents a significant departure from a cooperative approach that had become standard practice by the end of Obama's tenure. The CIA used drones and other intelligence resources to locate suspected terrorists, and then the military conducted the actual strike. The Obama administration put the military in charge of pulling the trigger to promote transparency and accountability. The Pentagon, however, must publicly report most airstrikes. Mr. Trump provided the authority to the CIA not long after meeting with intelligence officials at the agency headquarters on January 21st, the day after he was inaugurated.
Days after the release of a music video in which the rapper points a toy gun at a clown dressed like Trump and pulls the trigger, President Donald Trump is firing back at Snoop Dogg. Wednesday morning, Trump tweeted from the POTUS Twitter account, "Can you imagine what the outcry would be if Snoop Dogg, failing career and all, had aimed and fired the gun at President Obama? Jail time." The video is for a remixed version of the song Lavender by Canadian group Bad Bad Not Good. It features Snoop Dogg. At a point in the video, Snoop shoots the Trump clown with a gun that releases a flag with the word bang. The rapper was also criticized over the video by Florida Senator Marco Rubio. Rubio lost to Trump in last year's Republican presidential primary campaign.
I'll tell you what it's going to be made of. It's going to be made of hardened concrete, and it's going to be made out of rebar and steel.
The Trump administration is officially backing off that campaign promise. U.S. Customs and Border Protection is now considering other designs for the border barrier. CBP updated its proposal page and said it's considering releasing two separate requests for proposals, or RFPs. One would be for concrete wall designs, and one would be for other materials. The update might not come as a surprise. In an interview on CBS's 60 Minutes last year, Trump hinted at making at least part of the barrier from something other than concrete.
For certain areas I would, but certain areas the wall is more appropriate.
Part wall, part fence?
Yeah, there could be some fencing.
The announcement comes as the administration faces pushback over the rumored cost of the project. Republican leaders have said it'll cost between $12 billion and $15 billion, but other analyses pin the cost at nearly double. CBP didn't give a specific reason for the change. Over 600 parties have registered interest in designing the border barrier so far.
Authorities said a mass grave containing more than 250 human skulls was uncovered in central Mexico, most likely the victims of drug cartels over the years. State Attorney General Jorge Winkler told CNN affiliate Televisa the mass grave found in Veracruz State could be the largest in Mexico. Winkler told the affiliate Tuesday Veracruz is one big mass grave. The remains appear to be victims of organized crime violence killed in recent years. Winkler said the identification process has been slow and complicated. Authorities are working, however, to match the skulls using information on the database of missing people.
Swedish Minister for Culture and Democracy, Alice Bah Kuhnke, has suggested that Swedes who left to fight for radical Islamist groups in the Middle East should be welcomed back and helped to integrate into society. Ms. Kuhnke made the comment Sunday evening on the television program Agenda, which is transmitted by the Swedish state broadcaster SVT. The program focused on the fact that some 300 Islamic radicals from Sweden had gone to the Middle East to fight for groups like Islamic State, and around half of them had returned to Sweden. The minister added she and the government had no idea how many of the returnees were still radicalized versus how many left because they had become disillusioned with Islamist beliefs.
Voting has begun in the Netherlands in an election that has Europe on edge. Will the tide of populism help Geert Wilders, aka the Dutch Donald Trump, produce a similar shock? For Europe's establishment, his policies already have. Wilders wants to ban the Quran, close all mosques and take the Netherlands out of the EU.
This is our country, this is the Netherlands.
His far-right Freedom Party has been leading opinion polls, but Prime Minister Mark Rutte's centre-right party has recently gained ground. Immigration is the crucial issue, even more so given the diplomatic spat with Turkey. Russia banned Turkish ministers from holding rallies in the country, prompting Nazi jibes from President Tayyip Erdogan. It's unclear who the row will favour. Even if it is Wilders, it's unlikely he'll be able to form a government. All other leading parties have ruled out working with him. But if he does win the most seats, it would still be a seismic shock for Europe, ahead of elections in France and Germany later this year.
The Chinese embassy in Germany wants another apology from a German online retailer for offensive t-shirts. The offensive t-shirts were being sold by German online retailer Spreadshirt. Some of the t-shirts had slogans such as "Save a dog, eat a Chinese." Another said, "Save a shark, eat a Chinese." According to China's People Daily, the Chinese embassy issued a statement Saturday, March 11th that called Spreadshirt's previous apology unacceptable. The embassy had called for better supervision by German authorities on Thursday. Then on Friday, Spreadshirt CEO Philip Rook apologized for the offensive t-shirts. He apologized to, quote, anyone who takes any offense from the two designs in question. As of Monday, Spreadshirt has removed one of the designs from the platform, but the "Save a Shark, Eat a Chinese" design still remains. This incident comes not long after German politician Günther Oettinger was forced to apologize after he referred to Chinese people as, quote, slanty-eyed in a leaked video.
The privacy of people living in Britain is being threatened without them even knowing about it. That's the warning that's come from the UK CCTV watchdog. According to Tony Porter, the UK government's surveillance camera commissioner, surveillance technologies such as face recognition make CCTV body cameras and drones more intrusive. He says that images of people captured by these devices could be used alongside other data to secretly monitor the public, and there might be no regulations in place to protect people's privacy, as it's difficult for the government to keep up with technological advancements. Concerns over surveillance have also been raised across the Atlantic after FBI Director James Comey recently said, quote, there's no such thing as absolute privacy.
There is no such thing as absolute privacy in America. There is no place in America outside of judicial reach. Even our communications with our spouses, with our clergy members, with our attorneys are not absolutely private in America.
Malware has been discovered pre-installed on 36 Android phones belonging to two companies. In all instances, the malware was not downloaded to the device as a result of the user's use. It arrived with it. The malicious apps on the phones of a telecommunications company and a multinational technology business were not part of the official ROM supplied by the vendor. They were added somewhere along the supply chain. 6 of the malware instances were added by a malicious actor to the device's ROM using system privileges, meaning they couldn't be removed by the user and the device had to be reflashed. Most of the pre-installed malware consisted of information stealers and rough ad networks. Included in the malicious software array was Slocker, a mobile ransomware program that encrypts all the information on a device and demands a payment to decrypt it.
Samsung is joining the payment game. Samsung Pay lets you save credit cards, gift cards, and other payment methods onto your phone and then use it when paying. Your phone mimics your cards right down to the magnetic signal, so it works in most places that accept credit cards. But it's not just smartphones. Samsung has quietly been adding the technology to cheaper phones too, and plans to experiment with the idea in India.
In the never-ending quest to offer convenient ways for your friends to pay you back, Google is today rolling out an update to the Gmail app on Android that lets you send and receive payments as attachments. Just like sending a photo or PDF, users in the U.S. can now tack on money in an event sent from the app. This feature is already available on the desktop Gmail, but chances are the times when you need to get paid back or do the paying back, you'll be on your phone anyway.
At this year's Consumer Electronics Show, it seemed as if Amazon's voice assistant Alexa was being integrated into everything. Now, one tech fan has taken it even further than before by turning Alexa into a talking skull. At face value, it's more alarming than the Amazon Echo. As part of what he dubbed the Yorick Project, computer and robotics hobbyist Mike McGurran used an old Halloween decoration to transform Amazon's personal assistant into a literal talking ghoul straight out of our nightmares.
The Flint water crisis in Michigan is still ongoing, despite the fact it's getting little to no attention. You likely remember that story. 3 years ago, the city switched its water supply to cut back on cost. As a result, children suffered from lead poisoning and some have died from Legionnaire's disease. The story scandalized the nation nearly one whole year ago, but today, the water is still contaminated and only a few officials have been held responsible for the fatal outcome. Here's RT correspondent Ashley Banks with more.
Flint, Michigan's water crisis is still ongoing, and according to media reports, efforts to aid Flint residents are shrinking. Earlier this month, the state of Michigan announced Flint residents will have to cover the full cost of water in their homes. Residents living in Flint are mainly living off of low yearly incomes and are minorities who will not be able to incur this cost. Now, the state originally promised it would continue paying the water bills through March 31st. However, the authorities stopped short of that, only paying residents' bills until the end of February. Now, state officials say they made the change because they tested the water, and according to them, it meets federal regulations. Now, Flint's Mayor Karen Weaver said city residents were caught off guard by this announcement, adding this is a trust issue. That's what this is. State officials say one thing and then do another. She also said that more corrosion studies are needed and Flint needs at least 2 years to begin supplying its own water. Now, the water crisis began 3 years ago when the city switched to a new water source in order to save money. Shortly after that, several children were tested positive for elevated blood lead levels and 12 people died from a Legionnaire's disease outbreak. Now, experts say this is the cause of neglect that resulted in the water not being properly treated. Corrine Miller, who was State Director of Disease Control, was charged for neglecting to fulfill her duties. She pleaded no contest last year. She has been sentenced to a year's probation, 300 hours of community service, and has to apologize to Flint residents. Now, a total of 13 current and former government officials have been charged in connection to the water crisis, 2 of which were appointed by Governor Rick Snyder. To date, Governor Snyder has yet to be charged, and according to media reports, he is confident he will not be. But no matter how many officials will be charged, the water problem in Flint remains unresolved, affecting low-income residents the most.
Da frente pra aqui, tudo que tinha casa, essa beirada aqui. Aí eu gritando, corre tia, que a barragem vem, que ela olhou pra cima, já vinha aquela onda em cima da gente.
You're on trial for dozens and dozens of corruption charges.
Eu tenho consciência tranquila que as doações foram legais e que não influenciou em absolutamente nada a minha posição.